We have to step back and ask the question, like, what are these companies after? The change is going to happen. The university as it stands is not going to survive in the same shape or form. There's a lot of experimentation happening on the children. All these tech executives have their kids in non-tech schools. Um, so go for, I mean, like, if that's not your answer, I don't know what is.
Well, I just wondered, Bassem, if you wanted to briefly introduce yourself and give us a kind of feel for your background and expertise and interest in this particular topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So nice to meet you, Adam, and good to see you again, Robert. Um, so my name is Bassem Nasir. I'm Palestinian. That's the original identity, but as I grew older, have layered on many identities, including being also Jordanian, being also a U.S. Passport holder, married to a Bolivian, so sort of a citizen of the world. Have spent my life all over the world, uh, states, some in and a lot in the Middle East, of course. I'm currently living in Jordan. My current job, and this is a nice segue, is that, my current job is working with UNICEF. I work with UNICEF in the headquarters team uh, as an education specialist focused on secondary education and skills. But sort of to caveat this talk, I think I just have to say that whatever I say here does not represent the views of the organization that I work for. But education, how I would sort of define my entry into the topic is both professionally and personally, and most recently, very, very personally. So to begin with, I come from a family, and I know we will get this to at some point, Robert. I come from a family that has a Palestinian family that has deeply been enmeshed in the vision of the value of education to society. So the most coherent story is in 1924, my father's aunt, Nabiha Nasser, a visionary woman, and actually the daughter of an Anglican priest who had eight daughters and one son, who was my grandfather. Uh, um, so she started a school for young girls in the village of Bir Zayt, where they were living in, and with a vision of education as a right, but as also a way to establish a vision for society that is good for everyone. And to make a long story short, this school that was in the family home um, eventually grew through patchwork of new classrooms being added here and there into now on a different location of Birzeit University, which has around, I think, about 15,000 students, uh, a huge campus, lots of majors, which is considered, I think, objectively one of the top university in Palestine. My father was the president of the university for a long time. Um, and he was the one who actually changed the ownership of the university from a family-owned institution into a public, not as a government, but as a public board of trustees, independent university. And I think that has shaped. So my father being involved in the work of education and nation building, and his commitment to uh, public education that is, not privately owned, as well as, and this is sort of an interesting segue, insisting that none of his kids actually ever study or work at the university to separate sort of the conflicts of interest, have really shaped a lot of sort of the things and how I feel about education. And on a personal level, uh, I think I've really, really come from a family that embodies how education can actually uh, really uplift people from wherever they are. And I guess we'll also come to this for society and for the public good and not just for work. Uh, this is kind of what I've been doing for the past 20 to 25 years. Um, and I've worked in a whole type bunch of organizations and different types, from nonprofit organizations to now the UN to the private sector. And so I would say I have observed a few things that I've been reflecting a lot on. And lastly, I'm now the father of two young boys, one of them 3 years old and one of them 1 year old. So, and this is where Rob and I connected primarily. The rise of AI into education is becoming a big worry for me, and thinking about the life of my boys. So I'll stop here.
Let's pick up on that because it exactly leads into where I wanted to go next, which is in some of your posts you've been talking about how anxious you feel thinking about your sons, and I have exactly the same thing, which is exactly how we connect and what their future is going to be like, and around AI and education. And I just wonder if you can tell us a bit more about that. What is it that's making you anxious about what might be happening in the future? What is it particularly around AI?
You know, it's not really about, it is about AI, but it's not about AI. And I've been reflecting a lot on this, and it's funny how it, what the feeling comes before the explanation in some sense. And I've been trying to figure out, why am I feeling this way? So let me take a crack at it. I think the value systems of the world that we're heading into are becoming much more obvious in terms of sort of who who has the power to shape society. When you layer the power, and I don't say even the potential power, the power currently of AI, and what we know is going to happen, I don't think there's a question. I think for the people who say, "Oh, but we don't know if this is," I'm pretty sure things are going to get better and more disruptive. So put that on one side. And then when you think who is driving this conversation, I see a tremendous lack of positive engagement from organizations that were meant to uphold basic human values and human rights in the world, from civil society organizations to nonprofits to, actually, most importantly, to governments. And there's this level of, I mean, tech optimism. There is that level of anxiety. I feel like I'm hearing them. But in a nutshell, I feel the right people who are making the decisions are ceding a lot of power to big tech. And that power vacuum is being driven by organizations. And I've worked in one of those organizations. And I've tried to be as unadversarial as possible, because I know so many people who work for these big tech companies, and they're all great people, and they all mean well, and they're all lovely people and smart and sharp. But I think we have to step back and ask the question, like, what are these companies after? These companies are not after making the world a better place. Um, and it's very hard to say this, because it's just like nobody wants to hear this.
Do you really think that? Or do you think it's just the issue of good intentions going wrong?
Um, I think for the people who work like in the education, let's just, focus on education. For in the education arms for these companies, they're no, no. I mean, I think they have amazing intentions, but I think they're such a small cog of the machine. They would like to think themselves as like having their own intentions, but I think the bigger frame of mind about where this company is going, like, I'll give an example. Like, these companies are flooding classrooms with these AI tools and free AI tools without any of the legislation or the guardrails happening before. So this is on the one hand. On the other hand, they're doing a lot of amazing experiments and pilots, which are great. And, they're figuring out, like, is AI working to improve learning? And it's fantastic and it's work. But like the big macro picture is like, there's a lot of experimentation happening on the children. But B, we still haven't had the conversation about, like, what is this technology going to do to the minds and the relationships to our children? And they either don't have the power to ask those questions, or um, you know, uh, or the governments kind of also don't want to deal with that. So there's all this sort of, there is that intentions. There are, I don't think there's intentions going, I think the intentions are actually very for these particular silos within these companies. But like when you think of some of these companies, actually on the one hand, they're doing education, on the other hand, they're developing AI systems that weaponize like war machines. So there's something off. Like it's the same company that with one hand is doing this, with the other hand is doing this. So like how can you even like square that? So that's a lot where the anxiety is coming from. And when you layer on top of it, like my experience in terms of like how I've observed the cycles of introducing technology into education, like I think this is another round. But the difference is if we thought social media was disruptive, this is like 100 times more. So this is the current best articulation of the anxiety.
Hand over to Adam in a second. I've just got one other question if I can follow up, which is just around government, because it seems like you have some contacts with government. And what are the discussions you've been having there? I know you've mentioned one of them in one of your posts, and I just wonder if you can pick up on that. Where are governments? Where are education ministries? What's their thought process? Surely they must be trying to work through this like the rest of us are. What are they thinking? What's going on?
I don't envy them at all. And it's really easy for me to pontificate where they are. So I think in one of my blogs, I referenced this, and so let me try to articulate it in the best way possible. The ministries feel a lot of pressure to deal with this. But on the one hand, the answers to a lot of these questions are not in your face. So the answer most likely will need to emerge through consultative, ground, authentic dialogue backed by data. But ministries don't do this well. Ministries sort of just like to impose plans and come with straight answers and policies because that's what a minister is supposed to do. He needs to have, or she needs to have answers or visions and big plans. And because the other work is messy and it might not lead you to the places where you want to And sometimes it's also like not within the time boundedness of what it means to be a minister. Like it could take you a year. So there is this dissonance between how fast the technology is moving and how fast you need to make decisions. But I think what's worrying me more is the lack of interest in terms of trying something new, in terms of trying to develop these policies. It's like, once again, we get these big tech companies, we sit with them and we try to do the policies with them, and we speak a little bit with some other people, but there's no like real like, hey, this is really, and I'm not even just talking to Ministry of Education. I mean, if you abstract this a little bit outwards, everything is going to be related. Like the health ministry is going to be related to the education ministry, to the environment ministry, all that stuff with government. There's no like, hey, we are entering a uniquely different world, and the education system that was designed for a world that was previously existed probably needs a real major rethink. What do we do? And so the minister that I talked to said, like, what do you expect me to do when I have teachers who are not qualified? And, so we're just going to do like basics and we're just going to hope everything goes well. And I think there's two things in my mind. Like a lot of governments are thinking, let's do this and let's like at least show some progress. And by the time this all shakes out, it won't be my problem. I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but I think, and B, I think working with inertia is much more easier than trying to do something new. It's highly risky for a minister to come and try to do something. But on the other hand, I also understand there's no groundswell of civil society, public voices that are pushing the governments to do this. And I think this is where I'm interested actually in trying to move this. Like, I think if ministries and governments had like 20 different civil society local organizations saying, hey, you can't do this, maybe they'll slow down. So I think actually the name of the game these days is creating more friction because the technology is moving this way. So I think we need to create as much friction as possible in the systems to slow down things so that in the hope of better decisions being made.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in on a few things that you said. So many threads to pull up. I mean, I think we already had a huge warning sign with smartphone invention, right? 2012. We already know how that can roll out. You let technology enter into the system without any kind of humanistic values of what will this actually do to human society? What does it do to relationships? Will it increase isolation and loneliness? Those conversations are only kind of, they've been so delayed. Australia obviously just put in the ban. And I was just reading a report in the Guardian today, actually, which is that university undergraduates, huge spike in loneliness and isolation. No one meets each other anymore because everyone's on their phone. So I think one of the things that that I monitor really is this idea of progress. The philosopher Slavoj Zizek says, progress is overrated. Like, what we attach to progress now is ideas of technological progress that are unattached to humanistic values. So what we don't have in the conversation, so Robert will know that I'm often involved in conversations within the British university sector. You'll very rarely hear people within that conversation speak to those humanistic values. Well, okay, we have these new technologies. What will they do to behaviors, to all of those skills that we think education might be for, right? And the bigger picture of what that then means to society, how we are as citizens, how we operate in the world in terms of our relationships. And it's very difficult within our organizational structures to have those conversations with anyone tuning into you. If you start speaking about those things, everyone kind of dials out, So that also speaks to what you were saying about civic society, I think, and how those values have kind of leached somewhere since maybe the mid 1970s. I mean, I joined the university education system in the late 90s. And that was just at the tail end of that big post-Second World War movement to really embed humanistic values in education as a way of recovering from the trauma of the Second World War. So the first boss that I had at the University of Sheffield, a guy called Geoffrey Mitchell, his whole kind of life's mission was to spread university classes to all the members of the public, to make £1 classes in everything that you would want to do available with academics. All of that started to fade under kind of neoliberalist sort of politics and economics that came into universities. And now it seems if you kind of scale down to the school, the college, the university, and you listen in to the kind of conversations that people are having, what education might be about, what kind of values do we want to embed in that, I just find the conversations incredibly thin around all of those things that are most important to me. What's the impact on people going to be? And is it a positive thing? And how might we shape that?
Yeah, I'm with you. To be honest, I mean, I'm with you. I think there was a while, I can't remember which podcast I heard. Somebody said something really, really profound, which I keep hoping it's not true. It seems there is an intrinsic human sort of dynamic of not acting until it's too late. Because of the riskiness of inertia and because people don't know where to start and because, uh, so I wonder if this is also going to play out a little bit here. I think the example you bring out on Australia is like, imagine it took like being in 2025 to do this seemingly radical act, which also at the heart of it is not so radical. But imagine, like, play the counterfactual. Imagine if before all this, like these laws were into it and we had protected the kids before. Like, imagine if that world existed. Wow, wouldn't it have been amazing that these kids were somehow, and then, the companies developed their products in a different way. But like this dynamic is playing in a completely different way. And then I've become really also fascinated by like especially on this topic, and I think I know the answer, like, you know, at the risk of sort of just crossing subjects, uh, being Palestinian over the past two, I mean, it has always been sort of defining my life, but over the past 2 years, it just I became much more aware on how risky it is to go against anything, to say anything that like could jeopardize a career, a thought, or whatever. Like the amount of people who I expected to say at least something even benign on Palestine. Uh, the disappointment from so many of these people who I considered allies is just immense. But just to overlay this to this conversation, I feel like the short-termism in so many of the conversations is really disappointing. And I look at traditional organizations, including some of the real ones that have championed children's rights and human rights. And some of them are, put out stuff, but like I don't think it's anything up to the standard of what is required. And B, uh, uh, it's the the short-termism in terms of like people keeping their jobs and people, so I don't know what's it's a bit scary. And this is why like I've just been really trying to make my voice heard, and actually right now just trying to figure out where's the best way for me to make an impact on these conversations. I don't know if you relate to this, and it's been hard because like in one sense you reflect on your life and how a conference I was in the year 2020 is, I would say, 98% similar to the conference I've been in the year 2025, with a few examples, because like the system somehow just keeps rolling around and like around with the same dynamics.
Do you think we're avoiding the proper conversations? Do you think that oddly the technology it's way easier to have a conversation about how you're going to implement AI than it is to get into the core of perhaps what education might or should be about?
Yeah, I've been writing a lot about this, and this is what frustrates me. I mean, I think this is where sort of the concepts of adaptive versus technical challenges really can shed some light on this, and maybe I'll give you an example of how that is. So to frame this, I do think we are right now inundated with technical conversations about how AI can improve learning and improve learning so that people become better equipped for the marketplace. But nobody asked is what kind of marketplace are they going into, and what sort of, it's really like a very dystopian conversation about like people putting the tools in and asking the questions, but like there's a whole other conversation about like the world changing around them. And I find that really, really bizarre. I mean, the other conversations are really interesting. Like, what is this AI tutor doing? And, I find that fascinating but on a small level, but on a more existential level, like nobody's asking, like, what sort of marketplace is there going to be? What sort of labor market is going to be there? What are humans going to be doing? How different are they going to be? And as I said before, I don't think anybody knows the answers to. And depending on who gives you the answer, if you dig deep enough, you will understand their agenda. It's amazing how like I've become so tuned to this. When you read a report from the World Economic Forum and then you read a report from the OECD, then you read a report from a nonprofit organization, everybody has a little something to gain now. Some people, of course, are more genuine than others, but I think like in a nutshell, the private sector, capitalistic, business-oriented uh, uh, led conversation. I mean, and it's natural that they're having a conversation because they're the ones who are developing these technologies. And many times, actually, they are the ones who are lobbying the governments in many countries, and many times they are the ones who are funding the nonprofit organizations through their corporate social responsibility arms. So like it just becomes a really like a very, and then the small little organizations who are doing small protests here and there, like nobody listens to them, nobody cares about. So there is that big question, and there's a beautiful concept uh, that I'm actually going to be writing about soon called work avoidance. And work avoidance means when you want to avoid the real work of asking the right questions, the messy, you involve yourself in very busy work that could look interesting, that could uh, mimic itself in being really matter of fact. I'll give you an example about my life and my work. I've issued a lot of what we call guidance documents for how people should do this and systems should do this. But reflecting on my work, and this is sort of like my work, is this is the safest thing I could do. I actually uh, published a report saying this is how you should do things, and I issued a set of recommendations that in 100 years won't be done because they also ignore implicit power dynamic. Like for example, parents should become AI literate to you know to guide or protect their children from the use of AI. Great. I mean, that sounds like a very reasonable, valuable guidance. But has anybody thought like, and this is me, this is me who has a job. Has anybody imagined like the average parent in a developing world, the global South, who has three jobs, can't, who is probably illiterate, who has to have home duties, who doesn't know much about the technology, who is like, who the like teachers should do the same. Like, has anybody been a teacher in a classroom filled with 50 people where your voice is not heard? Like, all these things, are very safe ways to deal with it. And I publish the report, I send it out, I feel good about myself, but then nobody's having the real conversation. So I'm I'm coming to a lot of those, I would say. I mean, I I realized them a while ago, and I've always thought of them, but I think right now they're just becoming much more. The resolution of these thoughts is becoming much higher.
I mean, just to jump in on one of those points, one
Yeah.
of the phrases I always use for conversations within universities is just how shocked I am, and perhaps I shouldn't be, at how uncurious academics and educationalists working in university are about the impact of AI on the real things that matter. So 90% of all of the meetings that I attend on AI are about the tech. They're about, should we integrate this bot into this aspect of our, learning pages? How do we monitor whether students are kind of cheating on this, blah, blah, blah. There are no conversations about what kind of courses should we teach, what kind of skills and attributes do we want to embed in our learning and in our classrooms. What kind of society do we imagine in 5, 10, 15, 25 years? If you're a voice in the room that says, guys, I've just been having a look at our courses, should we have a conversation about the nature of the degrees? Now, this, like Robert says, maybe this is an opportunity to really think deeply about what education might be to serve a more humanistic kind of future. Everyone switches off. Like, the energy in the
No,
room.
because you're
If
also
you
going to be
say,
asking, the question, is this form of the university? I mean, like it becomes very existential very soon to people. And it's a very uncomfortable conversation because like the reality is, like if you think about it, like universities as they stand probably will, I mean, they will need, and I have come to the thinking that in a way, it's almost like any reorg. Most likely, what's going to happen is people are going to, once the money starts drying out and things, people will be forced to change, and it's going to be a very like sharp drop of organizations and institutions dying and new ones emerging. And so I don't know. So sometimes I wonder, but the harm that gets done, especially if they're public institution, and this is why I'm trying to have these conversations. Like, is there a way to, like, the change is going to happen. The university as it stands is not going to survive in the same shape or form. The education system is that, like, do we just wait until it just happens and we sort of adjust until the technology is pervasive and we start doing stuff? Or is there anything that we can do? And to be honest, I'm at a stage right now where I don't know if we are, as societies and institutions, are capable of this.
Mm. But
What do you think? What do you think?
I think what continually surprises me is that no one uses the word responsibility. So, as a public set of institutions, what's our responsibility both to engage the wider sort of public in these conversations about all of the things that we are concerned about, but secondly, how should we be responsible to our learners, both of today and your young children? And that's not even a conversation that's happening. But if you put your hand up in a meeting and say, hey, I found this new bot that I think might be useful to help students do this thing, everybody in the room is suddenly animated. So I think one of the things that's going on with the universities is universities are also involved in a kind of tech race to the bottom, which is that they want to be the university that has the most glitzy apps embedded in their learning applications. They want to be the university that seem to be kind of AI savvy, right? But without any of those broader conversations, not only is it irresponsible, it might be completely irresponsible, just like it was with smartphones to say, let's just drop this into the youth of the world's brains and let's just see what happens. Like, let's not have any conversations about it. So I think, being in the institutions, it's very clear that those conversations aren't happening. That tells us so much about the way society works and
What's your theory? What's your theory on why this is happening? Do you think it's people just worrying about their not wanting to take risks, worrying about their jobs, or do you believe that some people sort of just really have a very optimistic, or like do you feel like that? I I'm asking you this because I really this is also insightful. Like, do you think if you actually have a one-on-one with a nice dinner and a nice drink with one of those people who you think is not, with you, that like once they get loose a little bit, they go, you know what, Adam, you're probably right, but I'm a little like worried about, and I don't know, and this is scary, and like, or do you really think people like ignorance is bliss to a lot of these people?
I think there's so many different kinds of
Yeah,
responses to that. I think one thing is groupthink takes over a lot,
yeah,
and
yeah,
once you kind of become organizationally, people tend to get on board around a certain kind of way of thinking about something, and then if you're at the margins of that, you isolate yourself professionally, and you're seen as a little bit of a kind of an anti-progress,
yeah,
Luddite
yeah,
in that conversation. I think a lot of other people, yeah, they're worried about their jobs. So one of the things we've made the university sector an incredibly insecure profession, right? If you've got a job, you want to hold on to it. You don't really want to publish a paper saying, hey guys, we need to slow down on AI until we can understand what the implications are going to be. And we need to have conversations about the nature of learning and human society and relational impact of that. So you position yourself very much on the margins. I think the other thing is the economic model of universities. They're struggling so much within this kind of marketplace that they don't want to shift to a model that might jeopardize their entire future at the moment. So they're just kind of going one year to the next, hanging on, thinking, yeah, we could listen to somebody like the voice of somebody like Adam, but that takes us in a wholly different direction and is completely against the tide. So we're not going to do that. We'll just find a way of kind of managing those conversations whilst basically allowing the tech to kind of drive educational values.
yeah, yeah. I think I share a very similar experience, which I don't know if it makes for a great podcast, but I think we're coming. Yeah. I mean, I've yeah. I mean, it's, and I think if I was coming in new to this conversation, but like the fact that I've seen this cycle play out a few times with tech, from the one tech per child, one laptop per child, to the smartphones, to all this, and every time we said, but the technology itself is not bad or good. It's how we use it. Yeah, but like, and I've been very interested in this, framing a lot of this thinking in terms of the Uh, I'm not sure if you've heard of I can't remember, I keep forgetting who wrote it, that the medium is the message. Uh, and with AI, it's not like you can also like the technology is so ubiquitous. It's not like you can say, okay, like with AI, we're just going to use it to do this, but like then we're going to protect our minds when it's for this. No, it's just like you take AI, it's like, and this is what necessitates like this ability to have these proper conversations. I mean, if AI was just like limited to having like a small little app in the classroom and then like it's not available in anything else in your life, you could say, okay, maybe. But
I,
the medium is the message, yeah.
I'm increasingly thinking about this idea that AI as tools is probably okay. AI as infrastructure is a lot more troubling. So
Mhm.
kind of building on what you're saying, because I think that's where we're heading. We're heading to a place where it underpins teaching and learning. What I'm also thinking, picking up in it, you kind of headed there, and I think I've heard it reflected in other places. We're going to end up with a two-tier education system, and there will be the kind of functional education, which will be probably heading towards being cheap or almost free, which is underpinned by AI, and that will be in universities, it will be in schools. And then essentially what's always been private education, I can imagine there being a sector of private education which is not technologically infused whatsoever. And I can kind of feel that break almost like if you can afford to do it, your kids go to a school where they don't have that tech in the classroom. It's not there. They have one-to-one or very small groups with a teacher, and it's a real human being teaching them. But then that also leads me back because I think part of this conversation is also okay, that's fine, but then what do you fill that space with? So let's imagine that you have that university which doesn't have the tech in it. What is it that the students are learning? How is it different? Because I think if we're going to say there's a view which is not about kind of outcomes based, let's get like learning, then we need to have an alternative vision because there's no point just going, well, that vision's rubbish unless we can put forward something which is kind of equal and opposite.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this, as you know, Robert. And I do think part of, I mean, the beauty of education is like we know things that work. We have seen models that work. I think the only challenge has been like how to scale those models in a good way. And without sounding simplistic, the scaling of these models was not a technical problem, it was a political problem because it meant investing in these models in a way that actually reflects how maybe the resources that you need to put into that, and then you get what you need. Every time one of these models uh, you know needs to go to scale, it becomes a bit more expensive. So let me maybe just then take a crack at your question. So I don't know if I told you this. My first degree was in engineering, and then I went and I did theater school. So I come from this weird, weird sort of. I have a weird mind that is both analytical but also a little dreamy and little, you know, artistic. So analytically, engineering wise, if you were to look at this as a engineering problem, you would say, okay, if you know what the society is going to be like in 10, 15 years, you reverse engineer this thing. You say, okay, what kind of people do you need? What da 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 da, and then you develop the education system. But wait, we don't know where things are going to happen. So this is where you go into sort of like trying to understand, like, okay, what are the potential side? And they say, oh man, I still don't know. Like, will people have jobs? Well, so then you start asking yourself, okay, like in a situation where so much is unknown, like what are some foundational things that you can design education systems so that wherever this thing goes, you as a human being, whether you have a job or you don't have a job, have the best chance of, for the lack of a better term, thrive or like survive. And for me, these are, and by no means actually I am still like I could be wrong about them. Like I am still a believer that AI will not be able to take some of our core human capacities, like empathy, like feeling, like emotions, like relationships. But to be honest, I'm becoming even more skeptical about these things. But let's, for the sake of this argument, and for the next maybe 15, 20 years, let's assume this is the case. So then what I would do is I would build education systems that or focus on education systems on building these capacities. But to avoid me saying this and like as if like I'm feeling good, doing this actually requires a lot of things. But the reason also, but we have a lot of experiences. So I don't know, Robert, if you read the Birzeit University, what I call the Birzeit University principle, which I wrote about this. So as a similar parallel, like the Palestinian paradigm uh, is a sort of a parallel image of what living in an uncertain world means. So for an average Palestinian living in Palestine, you don't know where the next checkpoint is. You don't know if when you're going to be jailed by the Israeli occupation. You don't know when your house is going to be demolished. You don't know if you're able to leave your town or not. You don't know if the company you're supposed to start is going to be allowed to. So for many years, what these universities were focusing on, Birzeit actually, in terms of vision, was actually developing these capacities that I just talked about. So it's really interesting. Although I didn't study at the university, whenever I meet a lot of the people, especially from the older generation of when the university, before it got to a lot of scale, hardly any of them tells me about like the academics they studied. They tell me about the debates, the lectures, the community, lots of community work, olive picking, all these things that allowed them to develop a strong sense of self, strong set of values, relationship to others, relationship to communities, good critical thinking skills, uh, all these things that allowed them then to either build a career on or start a family. And I feel it's these kind of education conversations that it's so funny like these conversations were happening before, but these conversations were happening because like people did not think of education as a way to get work. And that concept of education to get work will still stay relevant to a certain point, but not in the way it is now. Like now, like the education for work is like, I would say is like 95% of the conversation. Um, and I feel like when people start, like in many countries of the world, people like get a lot of educations, they're still unemployed. I feel that's going to become a bigger story. So, so I think these will need to be the conversations both at the university and at the K-12 level. But I also think where it gets a little tricky, and this is where like I also don't want to undermine the value of knowledge because like in many of the conversations that people like with our mind worldview say, oh, we don't need knowledge. Without foundational knowledge of certain subjects and topics, it becomes very hard to use these skills. And I just published a blog around critical thinking. I will share with both of you. Like so many people are talking about critical thinking. We need to be critical thinking, da, da, da. But like without being well grounded in the foundations of a knowledge around a certain subject, it's very, very hard to become a critical thinker. You actually then like just like ramble.
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
So this is where I'm at on this.
yeah, I mean, I think I feel a lot of those things. One of the interesting things I think about conversations around technology and progress and how they become kind of like integrated into the mindset of all people's working kind of institutions. We came to education, I think all three of us, perhaps with a similar kind of scope of what it might be, and its fundamental kind of aims, which is that kind of transformative tool, knowledge, understanding, creativity, critical thinking. Like those values have to be there at every stage of education. Again, going back to the kind of the universities and this idea of responsibility, you would think that one of the things the universities would say is, look, we're going to get a team, we're going to have a kind of a committee involved here. We're going to get some neuroscientists in. We want to understand what this is doing to the brains of our students. We're going to get some philosophers in to kind of think about, but the only people in are people saying, I've developed this new tech app. So I think that's very disturbing and very telling. And the other thing is this: what we lose is never discussed or even seen. So Robert will know, I think, from the earlier podcast, if you think about smartphones and smartphones plus kind of internet, childhood play has decreased in the UK by 70% over that period, right? If you were going to have that conversation around kind of 2000 and say, look, we've got these great new devices, they're amazing, they do all of these things. Unfortunately, the cost is your children don't really get to socialize, build relational kind of skills, soft skills with other kids, and that's going to decline by about 70%. There are some other factors about that as well, not just the tech, but mostly driven by tech. That would be a conversation, but we seem to kind of go blindly down these routes without anybody ever having these conversations at the time that you need to have them. And with AI, this is exactly the time that we need to be having this. What's going to be the impact on human relationships of these technologies and of cognitive functions and of all of those skills that I think we valorize, which is things like creativity. So I want a curriculum that goes back to the Greeks. Let's have dancing, let's have philosophy, let's have maths, let's have music, let's have design, let's have things that have that that priority, that emphasis on the human and what the human can be. And let's build into all of these tech algorithms things that support those values and not just the kind of economic model of the world of education.
As you were saying this, it just like I just had this thought of how this is so similar to the climate conversation, and in a way that who is driving these technologies are a handful of countries, and they are sort of dumping them and flooding the world with them, sort of like the climate, where most of greenhouse gas emissions were coming from only a set of countries, and we're all facing sort of the dangers. And so many citizens around the world don't have a say in anything that is happening to them. Also, like climate, like this is a technology that doesn't respect natural or borders. So I'm with you, and it's really, it would be something if we as a society would say, okay, you know what, we're done with this current form of humans. Like, okay, we're ready to move on. But I think it's exactly what you said, is that this is being done to us, um, which necessitates a stronger reaction. And, I am so hard trying to avoid been so hard trying to avoid saying, "Oh, we need to work with the private sector." But I'm getting much closer to a point to the point where no, these companies, although they're sometimes might be well-intentioned, they are the people who need to be stopped. And the thing that's kind of what's stopping me is like I'm trying to figure out what's the right way of changing that dynamic, because like going out screaming and shouting is not going to help out. Um, so one thing I'm really now going to be trying to do is really um, tease out hidden voices from the people who are mostly impacted by the technology. So this is something I've been thinking about. How do you get the voice, and not just through statistics, not like 30% of, like getting personal stories of people who are either workers, parents, children, with real stories, to start putting pressure on the system. I mean, and building a movement around this in a way and I feel also that and I've been thinking a lot about this, whether this work is better done globally or more at like a country by country level. I've been going back and forth. I think part of me thinks at a country by country level is where, like, if you like, I'm in Jordan now, and Jordan is like one of those countries, oh, like let's embed AI into education. And I think there's a lot of sort of risks. Like, do we start like organizing almost like good old community organizing around these topics, having parent circle meetings, letters, stories, things like this, sort of just like your basic community organizing. I'm really struggling because like on the other hand, I see the push is so fast.
I am really interested. I want to almost come back full circle where we started about are these companies by nature somewhat evil and doing bad things, or are they doing it all with good intention? Because I think that is a really important thing. Because what's the motivating and the driving factor? Is it purely capitalist? Is it just that if we can sell our products into school, then that's good and we kind of don't care what the product is? Because it feels like these debates surely are happening in the big companies like OpenAI, and those companies must be having these debates. You would hope. I don't, perhaps they're not, I don't know. But they have the money to be getting these people, the psychologists, the educationalists, and people at a really high level to be working with them. What I because actually we're all on the same team. We should be. Like I don't see that it's in the interest of one of these big companies to have society fall apart. But clearly, like everybody can see the potential and the risk there. What is going on? I really do. I am a bit cool because I actually think there's a way through this whereby the AI is amazing. I'm not anti AI. I use a lot of AI,
Same.
and and I'm very worried that this conversation just becomes we hate AI, let's ban it. Because I think that is one is not going to happen, and two is actually not. We have this super powerful technology, and we should be using it for good, but we need to be thinking about second order, third order consequences of its use, and we're not doing that at the moment. But then that suggests that we can have an honest conversation, and that's my question at the moment. Can we have that honest conversation, or are the pressures just too great on too many sides for it's just going to get steamrolled through?
I mean, I'd be curious what Adam thinks. I'm in a bit of a pessimistic mode. I think, are these companies evil? I don't want to put a value judgment, but I certainly think a lot of the decisions they made, like when I tell you some of these companies, on the one hand, are building AI for weapons and then AI for education. So that just gives you some sort of what's driving the AI for surveillance, what's driving the whole organization. I, eh, where it gets complicated is you meet a lot of well-intentioned people and very ethical people who work for these companies, but they get, I don't want to say the word compromised. You rationalize. And you rationalize by saying, oh, if it's not me who's working there, then it will be somebody else, and I believe these companies can change their behavior with enough pressure from people, but without it, they won't. And so this is what I'm focused on. I'm focused on is how can we create some pressure in a meaningful way for these companies to either through government or through citizen. I mean, you've seen like forget about AI on anything meaningful. The only way these companies usually behave is when the pressure gets too high or that might affect the shareholder price. And I feel like somehow this might become eventually the uh, 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 need to be the same dynamic. I don't know, Adam. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. I mean, I think this kind of idea of packaging it as either kind of pro or anti-AI kind of misses the point. But I understand, yeah, you can get the flavor of a conversation, which is that we're all like, yeah, this thing's too dangerous. I just think, again, it's about the nature of the conversations that we have, both at a society and institutional level, kind of give us a lot of indication about what people's real motivations are. I think with the tech guys, I don't know if they're evil, but I think they're completely disinterested at the highest levels in human values. I think they are motivated primarily by, unfortunately, kind of the old things of power and money. That kind of seeps into their political associations and their political worldview as well. I don't think if you go into those rooms, they're going to have the kind of conversations that we're having. Another thing I'd say is that the best way of quietening a room in a university, let's imagine you've got a group of professors and you're going to raise a question. The best way of creating complete hush is to say, guys, if in 5 years we do some neuroscience and it's showing that the impact of the way that we're using AI, not AI itself, is having a fairly negative impact on people's kind of neural pathways, their creativity, their critical thinking, what would we do at that point? That's the question that will create, I guarantee it, utter silence, because not because people don't know the answer necessarily, but they don't want to engage with that question, which seems to me to be one of the important questions in the room. Like, it's a bit like with cigarettes, isn't it? Okay, but what happens if this like starts killing people at scale? What are we going to do then? Oh, we'll probably just fudge the science and turn it into a health product. The signs aren't very good when you look at the history of human behavior around these kind of things. They develop this kind of horrible momentum. So I don't know if they're evil, but I think we can see from their behavior of what they're interested in and what they're not interested in. Are they interested in creating a better planet? Are they interested in creating a society in which we have to kind of, because of all these threats, existential threats we're facing, we need to make sure that the conversation we're having is right this time. Otherwise, it could get very bad, right? Not only in terms of how AI might be weaponized by military, but in terms of things like climate change. So, yeah, I think you could definitely have these conversations and develop these tools in a way that was entirely focused on how do we make human societies, more the well-being of people in human societies better. Let's have that as our goal. Then fine, let's see how we can kind of integrate these things. When that's not the conversation, I just think again, my idea of responsibility. Who is taking the responsibility to monitor this? And I can't see anybody at an institutional level or at civic level who's doing that.
Yeah. I mean, and then when you think about like how this, speaking of the race, like in a way, like it's basically the US and China who are driving this whole sort of race. And then Europe is trying to like do a few, I don't know if it's gonna work. So I feel like also sometimes I feel this sense of futility, like I'm in this such a small part of the world that like where like things are being done to me and there is nothing I can do to stop them. Luckily, I have still a little bit of hope, and I'm really trying to do sometimes like pathways open up and magic happens. So like I don't want to, I haven't been defeated yet, but it really I'm with you. I'm with you, Adam. It's a and if you also want to, y- you know, I feel like you might have like maybe some seminal moments like the other scenario where we can imagine we started hearing it like this kid who unfortunately committed suicide. Like will we have more of these moments in a few years when the AI becomes that might force some action, maybe not to this level, maybe some other things happening. So I mean, I hope we don't get to that, and that's at least where I'm gonna try to go with this.
Can we're running short of time. We're almost out.
Okay.
I'm just wondering about, you said something about leadership is an act, not a position.
Mm,
And I feel some of the conversation we've just been having is around leadership. And
yeah.
so I just want to turn it back to you and thinking, okay, if you could change something which is a belief, not a policy, but a belief, beliefs that people have, perhaps parents or teachers or policymakers or people running AI companies, what might it be?
Yeah, so maybe just to go back to this. So this was one of the most consequential sort of university courses I took, which defined leadership as not a position of formal authority, but an act that anybody, regardless of where they stand, can take. Um, I don't know the answer about which belief. I would love for the ground rule of any conversation to be the benefit of humanity. I think if that was a core foundation of any conversation, I feel like things would potentially move to a much better place. I think the incentives of so many when you come to different complex systems, the incentives become so convoluted that I think this is where you do this. And so anybody who's led any social movement or stuff or type of campaign would tell you that you need to somehow appeal to people's core beliefs and core values, and that's I think where most likely thinking about what sort of belief I would like. So if I would go to a company, that's, I say this even as I'm saying it, I'm not believing that they would ever do this. So this is why, like, I go back to, like, we need to create the counter to these values, because they're operating from a completely different set of values. And by the way, back to your question about that education system, I mean, you know that this is happening already. All these tech executives have their kids in non-tech schools.
Yeah.
So go for, I mean, like, if that's not your answer, I don't know what is.